Good evening. Thank you so much for coming here, and I'm incredibly privileged to be next to Joey and Matthew. My name is Lucien Simmons, and I'm the head of provenance of the Metropolitan Museum. And before that, for 28 years, I was at Sotheby's as the head of provenance and restitution. Probably the best qualification I have for being here today is I've known Randy Schoenberg and Pam, his wife, for nearly a quarter of a century. And one of the great things for me, and one of the things that comes out in this movie, is that my relationship with Randy has been complicated. We've been friends, we've fought, but the great thing for me is I have great memories of being with Randy. I remember going to the opera in Vienna, going to see Verdi with him in the Imperial Box. I remember spending time with him in his living room in Brentwood in Los Angeles. I've been in London with him, in New York, all over the world. But the main thing for me is it's really built great memories, and I'm so privileged to have known him for so long. So really my first question to Joey is what are the best memories you carried away from this incredible trip with your dad?
Ooh, that's a good question. The best memories. Honestly, I would say that the best memories were after the shooting. We would kind of all go out afterwards, and the crew, and we would have dinner together and laugh and tell stories. And Brad, the producer, had gone to my high school with my dad as well. And so they all got to reminisce about their childhood through me, which was just wonderful. And I just being there with my family and my new family and the people that I got to meet along the way.
That's great. Matthew, we haven't met before, but how did you come to be involved in this story? How did you meet Randy?
So Randy and I had sort of known each other already, but more or less by happenstance. I had done a film a few years before about a pianist and composer, Arthur Schnabel, who was a friend of Randy's very famous grandfather. Who's mentioned in the film, but is not the focus of this particular film. And Randy and his parents had come to a screening of that film some years earlier at the Villa Aurora in the Palisades, which miraculously survived the recent fire and was a sort of an epicenter for German and Austrian Jewish immigrants to Los Angeles. And so we kind of knew each other, but we didn't really know each other. And I was doing a film with Brad, who's sitting right over there, the year before, and Randy came in to be interviewed for a short segment in that particular film as an expert on Austro-German Jewry and their proclivities, which was relevant to that film. And as sometimes happens on set, there was a short to the breaker in the house where we were filming, this 1920s house with very dated electricity, and the power went out and everyone had to sort of sit around for 30 minutes while they got the power up and running again and filming could resume. And Randy mentioned that he had just gotten back from a trip to Europe, and he was spending time with his cousin Serena, and he had this sort of crazy idea that he could probably trace his family history back 500 years in a very specific way, and wouldn't that make for an interesting movie? And I said, yes, maybe. Let's go to lunch and talk about it. And so we did, and I sort of thought that probably this was a very vague notion. But in fact, Randy knew everything there possibly was to know about his family over these 500 years. And in the course of these several conversations we had over lunch at his house in Malibu, which you see in the movie, I realized that actually this wasn't a film about Randy and his family lineage and the work he had done, but that actually it was the story of 500 years of Jewish history, of the history of Europe, as filtered through this one specific family. And that was an exciting opportunity. So that was sort of the jumping off point. And then we started to make the movie and realized actually it was a film about a father and a son.
And it's a great film about that. One of the things that struck me was that Randy, early on in the movie, says it's not just a single family story, but it's a people. And he says it's part of this larger mosaic. And for me, one of the great things about the movie is the way you told a story that's a story of Joey and Randy, but also a bigger story. And in fact, for me, it was ironic. I was emailing with Randy this afternoon because he runs Jewish Gen, or he's a moderator on this Jewish genealogical site. And I noticed that he'd actually put my father-in-law on the site, and he was the manager for kind of my in-laws page. And so I was emailing with him saying he got it wrong. And he said, come back to me. So it's really a very small world. And the great thing is the way you tell a big story through this intimate relationship.
Yeah, my initial concern was that the story might be too small, and then my secondary concern was that it was actually way too big. And once it became clear that everything could be sort of grounded and filtered through a story about two characters on a journey, and particularly a father-son story, and those stories always work in films, then we knew that we actually had a movie that was going to have some impact.
If you think that the movie was long, you should see how much footage we have. We were in those archives for like hours.
There was a very long early cut, it's true.
Yeah, they made me wake up at like 6 in the morning for like 3 weeks straight. And I wasn't even in school.
One of the things that impresses me is, Joey, you were telling me you had a big crew with you for this journey, and it was 3 weeks you were with the crew, and you were filming.
We were filming for some eight weeks total, I think, on the film. Yeah, it was quite an intensive endeavor.
So how set up was it? How did you approach being in small family gatherings with a full film crew?
Yeah. I mean, the entire shoot had to be worked around precisely that problem. I knew that I wanted it to be a documentary that felt more like a narrative film, which I think it does, and it certainly looks like one. At the same time, actual, genuine moments had to take place for there to be emotional resonance. And so our methodology was, we sort of knew, so we pre-scouted most of the journey that Joey and Randy would take, knew where we would be going, and then made a plan. And so for each shooting day, as early as Joey would have to arrive on set with his father, we were there 2 hours before usually, and we would set up and be prepared to capture moments as they happened, but within the framework of a kind of very cinematic treatment. So Maciej, who's the cinematographer sitting quietly over there, had this incredible challenge, which was how to capture those moments in a way that was still very filmic. And in the end, our solution was really Steadicam.
And it worked really well. And the thing I was impressed with is the coloration of the movie is really beautiful, and it's a great tribute to you. That it looks so great, and it kind of has a bit of a Jacques Tati look to it.
Yeah, I think once we I realized on the Scout that we'd be filming in quite literally the world's most beautiful places. I mean, we're filming in just as I walked in, I was reminded that we had actually filmed this in a Michelangelo-designed library in Florence, and those sorts of caliber of locations. It was very clear that would drive a lot of the look, and also that the feeling of the places was very central to how Randy approaches this material and how we wanted to introduce Joey to it. And so I wanted the film to capture that visual splendor, but also that kind of touch of sadness that's always just beneath the surface of each of these locations. So we worked hard to arrive at that look, and then spent a lot of time in the color grade affecting it.
And it worked. It really is a beautiful film. So Joey, one of the things I know is important for you is food. You're now studying at the CIA in Hyde Park. And you start the movie with cooking in your dad's house, which is now gone, in Malibu. What is your takeaway from this experience in terms of your ambitions as a cook and as an inheritor of this incredible heritage?
So the dish that I actually made in the first scene of the film was a Viennese dish or an Austrian dish called Tafelspitz, which is boiled beef, and then it usually comes with like side components, which is like potatoes and horseradish and applesauce. But I kind of did my own like take on it, and as well as I did a my externship from school last summer was also in Vienna while I lived in the Arnold Schoenberg Center for 3 months. And so I see that my future is kind of in Viennese cuisine or in Austrian cuisine. I grew up eating my grandmother's pastries every holiday. She would batch make them and then freeze them for the holidays or make them fresh. But I love the vanilla kiffel and the Sachertorte and all that stuff. And so I see myself kind of exemplifying that and carrying on the name. I'd actually like to have my restaurant named Piero Lunaire, which is one of my great-grandfather's pieces. It's one of my favorites that I was able to listen to a few times in Vienna while I was there.
That's awesome. So, Matthew, one of the things I noticed about the movie was the way you framed it around a number of family dinners or family gatherings. I assume that was deliberate in terms of working it around a structure of a family.
Yeah, it was both deliberate, but it was also something I observed about Randy on our sort of pre-scout. He has this way of collecting people and bringing. I mean, another way of thinking of it is bringing people together. And I think actually a character in the film says that at some point in the movie. And so I wanted to bring those to life in the film. And again, it was a technical and filmmaking challenge, how to make them still feel natural and genuine, and not to have a great degree of distance between the viewer and the characters created by the camera. So that was something we also worked on. So those dinners would often be these sort of almost half-day affairs, which would give all of the participants and attendees enough time to forget that there were cameras present.
There was one time where
and that there was lighting overhead.
There was one time where we actually ate lunch before the dinner, so I had to eat twice. But it was in Florence, so I was not complaining.
Yeah, we would do that sort of thing to have these very long, which is also a very European kind of family gathering. And it would allow everyone to sort of forget that we were there, and you would get these very natural, off-the-cuff moments between people. It was also a real sound challenge because you would have multiple conversations happening at a table simultaneously. And so our sound recordist, who I brought from Israel, found all kinds of clever ways to hide cameras, or hide microphones rather, under plates and in lights overhead, and so we could catch these kind of snippets of dialogue.
Because I imagine that's hard because you were in a Viennese apartment, George Gargush's apartment, and they're small.
Yes, it's actually smaller than it looks in the film. It's much smaller than it looks. Yeah, lighting it was like an entire day, and then they would arrive and have dinner, and we had to have rehearse so that the camera operators were not visible really to the participants, and the lights were out of the way, and no one felt like there were microphones hidden under their plates when in fact there were.
I've done it myself. It's miserable. You spend 2 hours being set up and made up, and then they say, "Now look natural." By which time your mind is completely blank, and you're just sitting there drooling.
I mean, filming is documentary filmmaking is in a sense a process of sort of breaking people down. And as Joey will tell you, after a while, he'd just been through it so many times that he was like, "Okay, I wake up, an hour of makeup." Somebody else selects what I'm going to wear, or at least consults with me.
It consults with
And then I'm taken on this, sort of adventure for the day that's going to feel endless. And at the end of it all, there'll be 2 minutes of a film that has been captured.
Well, what my dad always says is that they missed the best shots because right after they'd say cut, I'd say something funny.
So I know we need to open it up to the floor in a moment, but one thing occurred to me looking at the movie. One of the interviewees says at some point that you die several times, and the last time you die is when the last person forgets you. And the thing that I really was excited by is your cousin painting all the members of your family, because to me it's like breathing life back into the clay. They're unforgotten, and that was the most moving thing for me about the movie.
I think it was maybe also I found it the most moving experience of filming it, because there are many. I mean, unlike in my family lineage, there are many very important people in the kind of Schoenberg family lineage, going all the way back to this incredibly influential rabbi who's issuing Talmudic rulings to the King of England. But there were also ordinary people, completely ordinary people who were completely forgotten. I always mention Frumatol, the fantastically named Frumatal, who comes up in the film. That woman who lived in the 18th century would have no expectation that anybody would remember her in 2025, let alone be sitting in this room overlooking the Statue of Liberty in New York discussing her. But that's what Randy's work has accomplished, is he's sort of recovered all of these incredible lives from the dustbin of history and brought them back to people's attention. And sort of under the reign of Randy, nobody is forgotten. That's sort of, I think, the net effect of his work.
My dad also says that it was the central theme of the animated movie Coco, which Matthew does not like, but
I haven't seen it, but it sounds charming.
yeah, it is. It's very charming.
I love it. I love that movie. And I think the important thing as well is sitting in this museum now, one of the things that the Nazis tried to do in World War II was to actually remove those memories. And by bringing the memories back, we're actually undoing some of their harm. Now, I know we're on a tight time schedule, so now, any questions from the floor? Yes, ma'am.
I'd like to know who was the man who was often a sidekick to Randy in the scenes. He had an American accent, but I didn't get what his connection was.
Was that my dad's cousin Arnie? I believe it was Arnie. My grandfather Ronald, his brother Lawrence, his son, was along for the trip, as well as Serena. So Serena, Arnie, and my father are all first cousins, and they were the three branches of the family that were there. Of course.
I missed the explanation of putting a green leaf under the stone placed on a tombstone. I didn't know about that. And was that a local tradition or a European or a Czech tradition?
So as it was sort of explained in the film by the character, who has the vocal delivery of a sort of Jewish Yoda, I would say. He says many wise things. It's a sort of a reference to a particular phrase in the Hebrew Bible that our lives are like a wisp of grass in the wind. And it seemed poetic, and I liked that he said it in that moment, so I kept it in the film.
Well, thank you. I've been here the whole day, but they didn't put the sign up downstairs, so I just came in the very end. So I have two questions. A lot of people have no idea where their ancestors came from, and they don't seem to be connected or interested in that. I do in my father's family back 600 years, not as much as this one, but I did go to the place in Hungary where my great-great-grandparents are definitely buried, a town that isn't even on the map. So I have a personal story, but I'm wondering what the connection to the story means to the both of you personally, having presumably been more connected to it now, having produced this movie.
Well, I kind of grew up with a big family. I wouldn't say like a huge family, but my dad has always been searching for these missing relatives and family members. So there would always be new people coming over to our house where, this is your cousin, this is your cousin, this is your cousin. And I never really knew exactly how we were related, but as Maria Therese says so profoundly in the film, is that you don't need to know more than that. You're family. And you meet these people once, you meet them twice, it doesn't really matter, but the little connections are there. And every time you meet a new person, it adds something to your life.
So I had known my my family story because I had looked into it, and I'd even done a film in the sort of shtetl of my grandparents, and it was a typical European Jewish family story of cycles of expulsion, and then eventually the big one. And we were growing up, we were the kind of Israeli-American family that didn't buy German appliances or German cars. And, I was actually very intrigued and interested by what Randy said in the movie, that actually he's very drawn to his Viennese roots in spite of its history. And so that was very different than the sort of ethos I had grown up with, and I was intrigued and thought it was at least a sort of a jumping off point for discussion about how one does address history. So I kept that in the film also, and I've noticed a lot of people have brought it up in Q&As.
Yeah, I should say, so I mentioned earlier, my in-laws were part of this story, and my husband took Austrian citizenship, so it's one in the eye for the Nazis. He said his dad would have wanted it, although his dad left on a kinder transport and his mother didn't make it out.
Yeah, I think so. That perspective was so sort of foreign to my upbringing that I was really intrigued. I was interested in that way of looking at things, yeah, in a sense, it is the best possible sort of finger in the eye of the Nazis, especially when a Jewish chef will be, leading a Michelin-starred Viennese restaurant. We're all for that.
And my dad was able to get his Czech citizenship. He says, and now he has 4 citizenships. So when he goes to the airport, they ask him for his passport. He says, pick a flavor. And then they usually don't respond, so he just hands them one of them.
Oh, sorry, we have one here, and then I'll go.
Okay.
I was just going to say thank you. The film was fascinating. I think everybody thought that. So thank you for making it.
Thank you so much for saying so and for coming. And I should say, just as a little pitch, because the producer's here, so I'll be reminded afterwards if I don't. It is streaming, and we of course welcome your telling your friends and family to find it. It does seem to stimulate a lot of conversations amongst families, and that can be fun, especially with Pesach coming up.
So I'd like to say that I also enjoyed the film greatly. Reminded me, filmic-wise, of a recent series called Adolescence, in the method of the film, the steady cam and sort of back. But my family also came from Vienna. My dad and my mom came from Germany. But I wanted to ask a specific question to you, Joey. You're 17. I have a son who's 17, 18 going on 18, and this was 3 years ago, I guess, for you. And when I was 17 and 18, I wrote things down, and I looked back at them, about 30 years ago, and I was crying and thinking, oh my God, what did I do? What kind of things were going in my mind? And I would have hated for people to look at that now and say, I thought, what a waste. I was so young, and look what I was thinking. And it's your father says in the film at one point, he looks at you and says, well, you're young. You're only becoming a man. You're already 3 years older. I can see your point of view has kind of changed, the way you're speaking now and so forth from when the film. So I was just wondering how you look at yourself in that film now.
Ooh, that's an interesting question. When I was taking the trip with my dad, I was just finishing up my senior year of high school, still living at home. I had the support of all my friends and family back home, the same city that I had always lived in. And the past 3 years, I've lived across the country. I go home every once in a while, but the Culinary Institute is a full year degree, so I only go home maybe once or twice a year, and only for maybe a week or two at a time. And I have to do a lot on my own, and I kind of see this trip that I took with my dad as kind of him, like his sending away, like sending off present to me, because this trip, he kind of was able to be present with me. My dad, Lucian, can attest to this, but he's busy 24/7. He was skiing in Telluride this year and went helicopter skiing in Alaska, and then we're all going to Iceland and Copenhagen, and then he's going to Vienna and Venice, and then back to Vienna, and then back to Los Angeles, and that's just May. And he it's sometimes hard to get him to pay attention for a few minutes, but when his work is me, it was all me all the time. And sometimes it was a little bit too much attention, but for the most part, I got to spend at least 3 weeks, if not more, just me and him. And there were other people around, but he was just showing me everything that he had been working on in his entire life and why he had been working on it. And I may not have gotten it back then, but being on the East Coast, I'm able to do these things that he can't do. And so I kind of get to be the pioneer of the family on this side of the world, which is really special for me because both of my siblings live in Los Angeles, so my dad kind of takes the ropes there.
Thankfully, nobody was interested in putting me in a documentary when I was 18 years old, because that would be very inconvenient and embarrassing for me now. I thought about that as we were making the movie, because 18, it can be 17 going on 18 can be an awkward age. It really wasn't in this film. I think, in a sense, it was the lightning in a bottle. It was really the opportunity that was put in front of us. We had this actual 17-year-old about to turn 18 on this trip with his father, and then he's going to go out into the world. And it's possible that that can happen and nothing of a cinematic or emotional nature happens in the course of 9 weeks, but I took a bet that something would, and I think that's what we ended up capturing for the movie.
My dad always says, whenever he puts on like old videos of like my parents' wedding or when we were a child, he calls it the Family History Channel. So I'm very used to watching myself on screen, and he does that quite often. So would I have done things differently now than I would have 3 years ago in the film? Probably yes. But am I gonna turn my head at certain things that I've said in the film? Yeah. But I guess I just have to live with it because now tens of thousands of people have seen it.
Hi, this is another question directed to Joey.
Yes.
And I recall in the beginning of the film, you said you weren't too keen on going to cemeteries, and I'm just wondering, after the trip, has your mind changed?
That part of my mind probably hasn't changed that much. I guess I'm more accustomed to it, so I'm more okay going to cemeteries, but I wouldn't pick to go to a cemetery if I had to choose. But I always kind of like trade with my dad a little bit. When I was younger, he wanted to go to the opera with me, and so I said, can we go to a fancy dinner beforehand? So he would take me to dinner beforehand, and then we'd go to the opera. So if I had to go to a cemetery, I'd probably be like, can we go eat food first at least?
I love cemeteries, and as you might have noticed in the movie, so it was actually an initial bonding experience for Randy and me on the Scout. He would say, "You think you've seen a cemetery? Wait till I show you this," and you kind of see the results. I think in the movie, he knows all the cemeteries, all of them.
All of them.
So this is going to be our last question actually over here. I'm sorry if we were not able to get to yours, but we are on a limited time frame. So yeah, make it a good one.
We'll stick around for a few minutes in the room afterwards if folks have questions.
Thank you. My name's Mark. Joey, I'm trying to put Woman in Gold into context with what's happening here.
Yeah.
Was it you who your mother was pregnant with when your father quit his job?
Oh, I really like this question. So when they were making Woman in Gold, they actually decided to, because I have two siblings, as you saw in the film, they decided to exclude my brother entirely from the film. And then my dad said, who's going to pay for the therapy of the child that was left out of the movie? And so then they combined me and my brother, and they gave me my brother's name. So in Woman in Gold, Katie Holmes gives birth twice, once to my sister Dora, and once to a baby that is named Nathan, but is at the time of my birth. And the way that they do it is a little iffy, because what happened was my mom was dropping off my brother and sister at like preschool pickup or whatever, and then she went into preterm labor with me 3 months early.
Wow.
While my dad was in Washington, D.C., it was the day before, I think, that he argued in the Supreme Court. And then in Woman in Gold, I'm born right after that. But what actually happened was they put my mom on bed rest and gave her medication to keep me in a little bit longer. And I was born a few months later, and I think it was like 2 or 3 weeks before the decision ended up being out.
Well, they both got their movies in the end, so it's a happy ending.
Yeah.
Just a comment. Woman in Gold is one of my favorite films, so you can thank your father for me, because so much of it is about his persistence, and he taught me never, never, never give up. Never. I'll thank him for that.
Thank you.
So that's all we have time for. So thank you so much to our panel
Thank you.
for this amazing talk back. And thank you all of us for joining us today.